Somewhere right now, a person is sitting at a desk signing the biggest financial commitment of their life, a mortgage, 30 years. And next to the dotted line, there's a number. Let's say it's 6.5%. They look up at the loan officer and ask the only question that actually matters. Why 6.5? Why not 4? Why not 9? And the loan officer gives them the practiced smile and says, "That's just where rates are right now." Which is not an answer. That's a shrug wearing a tie. Because here's the truth nobody at that desk will tell them. That number wasn't chosen by the bank. It wasn't chosen by the government. It wasn't even chosen by the Federal Reserve. Not directly. It was set by a market most people have never looked at once in their entire lives. A market so enormous, it makes the stock market look like a lemonade stand. And it doesn't just decide that person's mortgage. It quietly sets your car loan, your credit card rate, your rent, whether your company can make payroll, and whether the safe part of your retirement account silently loses money in a year nothing seemed to go wrong. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, and specifically about the giant invisible machine that prices nearly everything in your life while pretending to be the most boring subject on earth. If you've ever wondered why borrowing money suddenly got expensive, or why the safe investments stopped feeling safe, hit subscribe and give this a thumbs up. Because by the end of this video, you'll understand money better than most people who actually work in finance. And I promise, that's a lower bar than it sounds. Okay, let's start stupidly simple, because the entire industry has buried this thing under jargon on purpose. A bond is an IOU. That's the whole concept. Somebody needs money, a government, a company, sometimes a city that wants a stadium it absolutely does not need. Instead of walking into a bank, they borrow it directly from investors. You hand over, let's say, $1,000. In return, they promise you two things: a fixed payment every year, and your $1,000 back on a specific date down the road. That's it. When the government needs cash, it sells these. When a big company wants to borrow cheap, it sells these. The entire thing is just organized borrowing at enormous scale. Nothing about it is complicated yet. But here's the one idea that everything else in this video depends on. The thing that 90% of people get wrong, so stay with me for 60 seconds. Say you buy that $1,000 bond and it pays you 2%, $20 a year. Fine, boring. A year later, interest rates rise and brand new bonds, same $1,000, same kind of borrower, now pay 5%, $50 a year. So now picture trying to sell your old bond. You walk up to someone and say, "Want this thing that pays $20 a year?" And they look at you like you're insane, because right next door they can buy a brand new one paying $50. Your bond didn't get worse, it's still paying exactly what it promised. But nobody wants it at full price anymore. So the only way to sell it is to drop the price until that $20 payment works out to a 5% return for whoever buys it. Which means selling your $1,000 bond for somewhere around $700. You just lost money on the safest investment you owned, without anything actually going wrong. So here's the rule. Burn it into your brain. When interest rates go up, the price of existing bonds goes down. When rates fall, existing bonds go up. They sit on opposite ends of the same seesaw, and every single thing in the rest of this video is just that one rule, operating at a bigger and bigger scale. Now here's where it stops being abstract and starts being your life. If you wanted to show an alien the one number that runs the American economy, you wouldn't point at the stock market, you'd point at something called the 10-year Treasury yield. It's the interest rate on money loaned to the US government for 10 years, and it is the gravitational center of almost every rate you'll ever pay. Here's why you should care even if you never buy a single bond. When a bank decides your mortgage rate, it doesn't invent a number out of thin air. It looks at that 10-year Treasury and asks itself one cold question: why would I lend money to a regular person for 30 years when I could lend it to the US government basically risk-free and earn that yield? The answer is, it wouldn't, unless you pay extra. So the bank takes the Treasury yield, adds a couple of percentage points for the risk that you're a human being who might lose your job, and that's your mortgage. The bond market sets the floor. The bank just stacks its cut on top. That's why when that 10-year yield moves, mortgage rates follow it like a shadow. People think the bank is in charge. The bank is just reading the same number you could read, and it does not stop at houses. Car loans, credit cards, student loan refinancing, the rate your city pays to build a school, the rate your employer pays to expand and hire, all of it is priced off that same Treasury yield. When it rises, every borrower in the entire country gets the same rent increase at the same moment. Companies that loaded up on cheap debt when rates were low suddenly have to refinance at much higher rates. And when your interest bill doubles, you don't post about it. You cut costs. And cut cost is a polite way of saying layoffs. A real chunk of the job losses people blame on the vague economy were really just the bond market quietly repricing everyone's debt at the same time. This invisible machine doesn't send a memo. It just turns a dial, and millions of lives adjust. Now I have to demolish the biggest lie in personal finance, because you've almost certainly been told it. The lie is this: stocks are the risky part of your portfolio, and bonds are the safe part. Stocks for growth, bonds for safety. That's the seatbelt. And for decades, that mostly held. Until a year came along where the Fed cranked interest rates up faster than almost ever before. And remember our rule, rates up means existing bond prices down. So the safe part of millions of retirement accounts didn't just fail to protect people. It bled. The broad bond market had one of its worst years in its entire recorded history. The safest long-term government bonds on the planet got absolutely hammered. Millions of people opened their statements expecting the boring, stable part of their portfolio to be holding the line, and found out it was the thing losing the most. Were they lied to? Sort of. Here's the nuance nobody bothered to explain. Bonds protect you from exactly one risk: the borrower not paying you back. And the US government will essentially always pay you back. But there are two other risks hiding in the fine print that nobody mentions. The first is inflation, which quietly shrinks what those fixed payments can actually buy. And the second, the big one, is interest rate risk, which is everything we just talked about. There's even a number that tells you exactly how exposed you are to it. It's called duration. And it's the most useful concept you've never heard of. Roughly, duration tells you how much your bond drops for every 1-point rise in interest rates. A bond fund with a duration of 6 loses about 6% when rates rise a single point. A long-term fund with a duration of 17 loses about 17% per point. So in a year where rates rise several points, Grandma's safe bond fund suddenly moves like a tech stock. Except without anyone ever warning her she was making that bet. Quick favor before we keep going, because this next part is genuinely my favorite. If this video is connecting dots for you, hit the like button. It's free, it takes a second, and it tells the algorithm that regular people actually want to understand how money works. Okay, back to the machine. Because this same rule, this same boring seesaw, doesn't just bruise retirement accounts, it takes down banks. It has taken down entire governments. Picture a bank that took in a flood of deposits and parked a huge chunk of it in long-term government bonds, the safest assets in existence, supposedly. Then rates spiked, and by the rule you now understand, those bonds quietly lost a fortune in value on paper. The bank wasn't gambling on anything wild. It bought the most boring assets on earth at exactly the wrong time, funded by deposits that could vanish in an afternoon. When word got out and depositors panicked, that bank went from fine to seized in a matter of days, killed by nothing more exotic than the rule we covered 3 minutes ago. And it has done the same to countries. A government once announced the pile of spending it couldn't fund, and the bond market looked at the math and said out loud, no. Investors dumped that country's bonds so violently that it nearly cracked the nation's own pension system, and the government was effectively forced to reverse course within weeks. There's a famous line from a political strategist who said he used to want to come back as a president or a pope, but now he'd want to come back as the bond market. Because the bond market can intimidate everybody. He wasn't joking. So here's the reframe, the thing I promised you at the start. You have been a player in this market your entire adult life, and nobody ever handed you the rule book. Every mortgage payment, every car loan, every dollar sitting in the stable fund of your retirement account, you were always in the game. The bond market was always pricing your life. You just never knew it had a name. And there is an entire industry that is perfectly comfortable keeping it that way. Because a person who doesn't understand where their rate comes from is a person who never asks if they're getting a fair one. But now you know the single rule the whole thing runs on. Rates up, prices down. and you've seen it move mortgages, freeze housing, trigger layoffs, sink banks, and discipline governments. Nobody who watched that happen ever called bonds boring again. So, what do you actually do with this? Let's get practical. First, watch the 10-year Treasury yield. It takes 5 seconds. When it climbs, mortgages, car loans, and corporate borrowing are all about to get more expensive. When it falls hard and fast, the market is usually bracing for trouble. It's the closest thing the economy has to a check engine light, and now you're one of the few people who knows how to read it. Second, stop quietly donating money to your bank. The average savings account pays almost nothing, while short-term government bonds and money market funds can pay many times more for the same safety. Same money, same security, a wildly different amount of interest. Your bank is counting on you never noticing. Third, know the difference between a bond and a bond fund because it ambushed millions of people. If you buy an individual bond and hold it to the end, you get all your payments and your full principal back, regardless of what rates do. A bond fund never ends. It gets repriced every single day, which means a rate spike shows up as a loss on your statement that just sits there. Neither is wrong, but you deserve to know which one you actually own. Fourth, check your duration. It's listed right on any bond fund's fact sheet, and it's your honest risk label. Short duration, small swings. Long duration, you're making a big bet on interest rates, whether you meant to or not. And fifth, remember that safe is never the whole story. Safe from default is not the same as safe from rates or safe from inflation. The people who got hurt weren't reckless. They just owned a risk nobody named for them. Here's the thing nobody tells you about the bond market. You don't need to trade bonds. You don't need a finance degree. You just need to stop being the only person at the table who doesn't know what that number on the mortgage means. Because somewhere right now, someone is signing that 30-year commitment, asking why their rate is what it is and being handed a shrug in a tie. That used to be all any of us got. But the machine is going to keep pricing your life either way. Every loan, every payment, every year. The only real question is whether you can finally read the price tag. And now you can. I'll see you in the next one.